New York City, and organized crime, yeah, that connection runs deep, like way back. But here's what many people don't know. The Irish were the first to really get it jumping. Way before the mafia headlines and Hollywood flicks, it was Irish-American kids behind a little grocery store in the old Five Points, now known as Mulberry and Baxter Streets, who kicked it all off. They called themselves the 40 Thieves. Not too far from them, another crew popped up in the 1820s, the Roach Guards. And not long after, the Kerryonians came through, but they had rules. You couldn't just pull up and join. Your roots had to trace straight back to County Kerry in Ireland. By the 1850s, New York was already catching heat from gang wars, over 200 of them. And this wasn't just downtown beef. Some of these fights made it all the way uptown to places like 108th Street. It was wild out there, and most of the ones in it, young people. Fast forward to the 1920s and 30s, and the gang scene in New York was starting to shift. Yeah, gangs were still popping up, but it wasn't all about violence. For a lot of black youth up in Harlem, joining a gang wasn't just about the streets, it was about having something to do. White kids had paper routes, delivery jobs, and little errands to keep them busy. Black kids, they weren't getting those same opportunities, so they had to find another way to stay active. Gangs gave them a place to belong. Over time, those early gangs evolved. They aren't the same as the ones from the 1920s. Nowadays, you'll find most of them locked up, but their reach still stretches into the streets. And what's wild is how some of these newer New York gangs are straight borrowing moves from the West Coast playbook. A lot of young people are calling themselves Bloods, repping the red, throwing up hand signs, and doing initiations. Some of them even branding themselves 3 dots and a triangle burned into the skin. But one of the darker parts, that initiation, it traces back to the original Bloods out west, slashing random faces with box cutters. And now that same ritual is popping up in New York. But here's the wild part. A lot of these kids aren't even getting brought in by real OGs. They're just seeing stuff, copying it, and jumping in head first. Right now, there are about 600 people spread across 16 different blood sets in the city. And believe it or not, a lot of this gang life actually kicks off behind bars. Back in the day, it was the Latin Kings and Netas running the prison scene, but that flipped. Now it's the Bloods calling shots. So in this video, we're breaking down 5 NYC gang sets that are still running the streets. 183 Gangster Bloods gang. The 183 Gangster Bloods, better known in the streets as the 1-8 Trey Bloods, are not just some small-time set. These dudes have been holding it down in the Bronx, and they go way back. Matter of fact, they were one of the founding crews that helped form the United Blood Nation right inside Rikers Island back in the day. That whole alliance came together as a way to hold power behind them jail walls, but it didn't stop there. Once the streets got wind of it, things spread fast. Now this crew moves like a unit, whether it's stacking money, running weapons, or pushing up on territory, they all in. They handle their business through violence, threats, and fear, assaults, extortion, whatever it takes. And they aren't just out here wilding for no reason though. Every move they make has a purpose behind it. Control, respect, and survival in a city that never sleeps. Mac Brims. The Mac Brims, often seen as the new mafia of New York, are a dangerously organized and ruthless gang rooted deep in the Bronx. They're not just some random street crew. These dudes are part of the larger Bloods organization and have grown into one of the most feared groups in the city. Their hands are all over the drug game, illegal gun sales, and even murders, and they've got such a tight grip on Rikers Island that insiders say they decide who gets contraband and who lives or dies inside those walls. Their story didn't start yesterday. The Mac Brims trace their roots back to the 1960s, originally known as the LA Hat Gang. Over time, they evolved into the 5 to 9 Brims and eventually took on the name Mac Brims before the early 2000s. In NYC, there are actually 4 Brim factions, and together they're often referred to as the New York Blood Brim Army. But the Mac Ballers stand out. They're not just another set. They've built an empire that's got the streets and even parts of the prison system on lock. In the Bronx, especially in places like Morrisania, where poverty and lack of opportunity hit hardest, the gang found its roots. Young guys with nothing much going for them were easy targets to get pulled in. The Mac Baller Brims built themselves up by being insanely violent and shockingly organized. Other gangs in the city are said to be scared of them, and innocent people have been caught in the crossfire of their street wars. That violence, paired with sharp structure and hierarchy, is what's kept them powerful. Unlike other loosely structured blood sets, the Mac Ballers are all about discipline. They got ranks, roles, and a whole command structure. You don't just join and do what you want. Everybody's got a job, and they're expected to respect that chain of command. This setup keeps things tight, but it doesn't mean everything runs smoothly. Sometimes jealousy pops off, or people feel like others aren't doing their part, but even with that, their system works better than most. Leadership in the Mac Ballers is solidified through fear, loyalty, and strategy. The main shot caller was a man named Larry O. Calderon, a convicted criminal with over 15 years behind bars. Despite being locked up, Calderon was still running things like a mob boss. His right-hand man, Eli Rios, is serving life for murder, and together they've operated like a mafia board of directors. Decisions on hits, betrayals, and gang business don't just happen on the streets. They're orchestrated from prison, using girlfriends and family members to send coded messages through Facebook and Twitter. The Mac Baller Brims didn't fall apart when their top bosses got caught. That's how strong their setup is. Even with Calderon out of the way, the gang keeps pushing. Young people are joining faster than ever, and even older members are noticing the new faces they don't recognize. The gang's influence has been spreading not just across the boroughs, but out into New Jersey and beyond. Getting into the Mac Baller Brims ain't easy. The initiation rites are brutal. Beatdowns, serious crimes, or even murder are often required. Some recruits don't survive the process. Cops say this gang has both official members and a wave of hangarounds or wannabes trying to earn their stripes. The rise in young recruits shows how deep the gang's pull runs, especially in neighborhoods where options are slim. Inside the gang, there are two main factions, the money unit and the murder unit. The money crew is in charge of stacking millions through substances like heroin, crack, weed, and prescription pills like OxyContin. They also make money from guns smuggled through what they call the iron pipeline, as well as robberies, extortion, prostitution, kidnapping, and more. Even in Rikers, they run a whole underground market, $10 cigarettes, scalpel sales, and protection schemes. It's a dark economy with its own set of rules. Now, the murder unit, that side of the gang, handles the bloodshed. They do contract killings, executions, and have been tied to multiple murders, not just in NYC, but across the region. These dudes don't just fight rivals, they kill for profit. And they've even carved out a lane in music. There's a young rapper named Bala Mac who cops think might be connected to them, though nothing's confirmed. Some of these Mac Baller members got real money too, owning property, running legit businesses, stacking wealth most wouldn't expect from street guys. This ain't some reckless crew. They move smart, stay tight, and know how to turn street clout into real power. Bottom line, the Mac Baller Brims got New York in a chokehold, and until that grip loosens, they'll keep flooding the streets with substances, violence, and a new wave of recruits. 9 Trade Gangster Bloods. The 9 Trade Gangster Bloods, better known in the streets as NTG, Bentleys, or sometimes even the Billionaires, are a wild and deeply rooted set within the bigger United Blood Nation. They got their start in 1993, straight out of Rikers Island in New York City, and from day one, their name carried weight. Born behind bars, they were formed by black inmates looking to protect each other and represent where they came from. different blocks, hoods, and boroughs. But once they touched down back on the streets, that jailhouse brotherhood turned into a full-blown gang empire that stretched way beyond NYC. At first, 9 Trey was holding down Harlem heavy, pushing heroin and crack while also building their name through violence. If there was a fight to pick, they were in it. Robberies, shootouts, and beatdowns were their way of gaining respect and street credit. As time passed, their names started ringing out across New York, especially in the Bronx and Brooklyn, with offshoots popping up like 1-8 Trey, Valentine Gang, Grenade Gang, and Sex Money Murder. Brooklyn had G-Shine repping the set, and soon enough, 9 Trey was not just a local thing. It was East Coast wide, hitting spots like New Jersey, North Carolina, Maryland, Virginia, and DC. Through the late 90s and early 2000s, NTG wasn't just expanding, they were getting deeper into the criminal game. A lot of members started getting locked up again, this time on heavier charges like sex trafficking, weapons charges, and racketeering. Tattoos, red rags, hand signs, they were all part of the gang's identity, but the law wasn't sleeping on them either. In 2006, a major bust called Operation 9 Connect went down. Cops from over 30 agencies across New Jersey joined forces and arrested almost 100 people linked to 9 Trey. That move hit hard and showed just how serious and widespread the gang had become. Law enforcement even labeled them the most violent crew running in Jersey at the time. Then, in 2013 and 2014, more big names started getting snatched up. In North Carolina, 5 men and 3 women tied to 9 Trey got busted in a drug ring. Not long after, Thaddeus Snow, who was the top dog of 9 Trey, got arrested. By the time the court was done with him, he was convicted of racketeering, robbery, drug dealing, sex trafficking, and gun charges. Basically, they threw the book at him. But no moment brought more national attention to 9 Trey than when Tekashi 691 got wrapped up with them. The rainbow-haired rapper went from shouting gang slogans in his songs to testifying against his crew in court. It all kicked off in 2019 when he got arrested alongside other 9 Trey members. Instead of keeping it solid, he flipped. On September 17, 2019, he sat on that witness stand and aired everything out. The gang structure, the crimes, the internal beefs, even naming rappers like Jim Jones and Cardi B as allegedly tied to different gang sets. His cooperation led to the convictions of key players, including Anthony Harv Ellison and Aljamiah Nuke Mack. Both were found guilty of serious charges like kidnapping and racketeering. While they were looking at life, Tekashi ended up with just 2 years, with 13 months credited. Then, due to COVID-19 and his health conditions, he got an early release to home confinement in April 2020. Now, 9 Trey isn't just some random street gang. They operate with structure like a business. There's a hierarchy that stretches from the streets to the jails, especially in NYC, where a lot of the leadership still holds power from behind bars. At the top, the big dogs form what's like a national council, real decision makers who set rules and call shots. These leaders created a strict system of 31 rules, and every member has to follow them to the letter. The number 31 holds real weight in their world. Not only does it represent their rules, but it also shows up in everything from initiation rituals to gang dues. If someone wants to get down with 9 Trey, they have to take a 31-second beating. After that, it's $31 a month in dues. That cash gets split up. Some goes to help out families of locked up members, and the rest flows up to the big dogs. It's all about structure, discipline, and staying loyal. And even with all the heat they've faced, the arrests, the headlines, the big trials, 9 Treys still out here. They might have lost a few heavy hitters, but the engine that keeps them moving, still running strong. Bloodhound Brims. The Bloodhound Brims, or BHB, aren't just some local crew doing dirt on the side. These dudes have a whole structure, a whole mission, and they moved with serious purpose from around 2005 up to 2016. Based mostly in New York, They had their hands in everything from NYC streets to upstate towns like Elmira, and even across state lines into Pennsylvania. They weren't moving solo either. They were a part of the larger Bloods network, specifically tied to the New York Blood Brim Army, or NYBBA. And this wasn't just some street thing. They had reached both in and outside prison walls across federal and state systems. At the heart of the BHB operation were a few major goals. First, they wanted complete control over their group, rules, hierarchy, and leadership. They had their system of law inside the gang. Second, they were chasing money, and they didn't care how they got it. Armed robberies, moving drugs, flipping stolen cars. Third, they wanted dominance, not just on the street, but inside prison too. Violence wasn't a maybe, it was a core part of how they kept control. Fourth, they had serious beef with rival gangs like the Hit Squad Brims, Mac Baller Bloods, and 9 Trey Bloods. If you disrespected BHB, you were a target. Last, they used violence as a marketing tool. The more fear they put out, the more power and respect they got back. Their criminal playbook is stacked. These aren't just some corner hustlers, they're organized. Armed attacks, shootings, stick-ups, thefts, they come at rivals, enemies, and sometimes even innocent people caught in the wrong spot. The aim is to send a message. BHB runs this, and they're not the ones to play with. Inside the gang, things are strict. Members have to swear loyalty, and they're not just running wild, they're structured. The crew is broken down into sections they call pedigrees. Each pedigree has leaders, treasurers to collect dues, and enforcers to make sure rules are followed. Everyone knows their role, and if you slip up, there are consequences. New members don't just get jumped in and let loose. They got actual paperwork, written rules that laid out how things worked. The BHB paperwork explains your duties based on rank, how you should act, what happens if you disobey, and the code you have to live by. Members are expected to handle business for the gang and show loyalty at all times. Snitching, that's a death sentence. Giving money to the higher-ups, putting in work when it comes to violence, and following a strict communication chain. All of it is expected. They even speak in code to keep police from catching on. Everything from guns to stolen cars has a nickname. Guns are called Stacy's, Jackie's, Wifey's, or Grips. Robberies are Stains. Stolen whips are Stolies or V's. Shootings, that is spinning the block, or ootings. If you aren't speaking their language, you aren't really in it. Substances are a big part of their hustle. Crack, powder, cocaine, heroin is all part of the game. BHB members push product all across their territory and beyond, but the substance game brings heat, and that leads to more violence. BHB is constantly in wars with other gangs over turf, supply lines, and control of the block. They shoot, stab, and beat down whoever they think is threatening their hold. And it's not just outsiders catching heat. Internal beefs within the gang lead to BHB members turning on each other, sometimes violently, as they fight for rank and power. It's a ladder to climb, and the only way up is through violence. The leaders don't do the dirt themselves. They send younger members to prove themselves by handling violent missions. Shootings, armed robberies, intimidation, those are entry-level tasks. Once completed, they report back like they're clocking in. That's how they earn stripes. Do enough dirt and you get a promotion. More power, more respect, maybe a leadership role. They've got stash spots full of guns and ammo, ready for whenever someone needs to handle business. Meetings are a big part of how they stay organized. They call them powwows or 9/11s. Sometimes they're small, just a specific pedigree getting together, and sometimes the whole BHB family pulls up. Word gets around through text, word of mouth, even flyers. At these meetings, they talk shop, beef with rival crews, updates on arrests, who got shot, what moves they need to make. They also collect what they call kitty dues, basically gang taxes. That money covers commissary for locked up members, legal fees, guns, substances, whatever the gang needs. And if you don't pay up, you're out. They call it missing a flight. No dues, no loyalty. That means you're done. Social media is part of their game too. Instagram, Snapchat, regular texting. They used all of it to stay connected. They'd plan hits, talk trash to enemies, brag about what they did, and post up gang signs, hashtags, and coded messages. Even their music pushes the BHB name. It is all part of building the brand, making sure everyone knows who they are and what they stand for. Sex, Money, Murder, or SMM, ain't just a name you hear thrown around on the block. It's a whole set born out of the Soundview houses in the Bronx and deep-rooted in East Coast gang history. It started off as a neighborhood thing, but what it became, a whole movement. They came up in the NYCHA projects, in one of those spots where hope was low, but hustle was high. Out of that came names like Twin, Suge, Pipe, and the infamous Pistol Pete. These dudes were legends in their own way. Some saw them as protectors, others knew them as stone cold killers. But either way, their story is wild. Back in the 90s, Soundview was like a battlefield. Substances were flooding the blocks, and with that came both money and bloodshed. Pete and his crew were running things heavy. And what made them different from just another set pushing weight? They were smart, real smart. They weren't just slinging dope, they were laundering money, opening businesses, putting things in other people's names, and keeping their cars leased so the feds couldn't tie anything back. But let's be real, the smarts weren't what got them feared. It was the violence. These dudes would pop off with no hesitation. Pistol Pete, the leader, he wasn't the type to sit back and make others do the dirt. Nah, Pete was in it. He did his murders, bragged about it, and wore that violence like a badge of honor. Most bosses stay behind the scenes. Pete was front line, and that energy trickled down to everyone under him. That's how SMM grew, off blood and fear. Pete studied gangsters like it was homework. He was heavy into the history of the mafia, trying to model himself after those guys. But the reality, nobody was really watching the Soundview projects like that. The NYPD and feds were too busy tracking the mafia families. They didn't care what was happening in a poor black neighborhood. They saw it like, let them kill each other off, who cares? And that silence, that gave Sex, Money, Murder space to grow even bigger. It wasn't until Thanksgiving Day in 1997 that things reached a tipping point. 2 SMM members got executed right in front of families during a football game. Broad daylight, kids, women, everybody saw it. That right there, that made the whole community snap. They were already tired, but that killing made even the people who stayed quiet start talking. Enough was enough. Then Pete made a big move. He connected Sex, Money, Murder with the United Blood Nation. That decision split the crew. Some, like Pipe, thought they didn't need the Bloods. They already had their rep. SMM had already built their name from the Bronx to Brooklyn, and aligning with UBN meant more heat from the feds. It was a risk, and not everybody was feeling it. But Pete made the call, and once that bond was made, SMM became one of the first New York crews to officially ride with the Bloods. After that, you started seeing SMM spread fast, from Soundview to the South Bronx, and then out into Brooklyn neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy, Brownsville, Crown Heights, and East New York. They even made their way into Long Island, hitting spots like Roosevelt and Hempstead. Their influence was stretching further than anyone expected. But with that growth came attention. For a while, the feds barely looked their way. But once they realized how deep SMM was embedded in the streets and how violent they were, they knew something had to be done. That's when a prosecutor named Liz Glazer came through with a game plan. She knew the feds alone couldn't take down the whole operation. So she came up with a strategy to get federal agents and local cops working together. See, the NYPD knew the streets. They knew who was who pulled what trigger, and who ran what block. But the feds, they brought in the power of RICO laws that come with heavy time and no mercy. Glazer figured if they could combine that local street intel with federal power, they'd have a real shot at shutting it all down. And that's exactly what happened. Detectives like O'Malley and Pete Forcelli used that street knowledge to connect the dots, while prosecutors hit gang leaders with big federal charges, the kind that make even the hardest gangbangers think twice. Facing serious Fed time, some of them flipped, started telling, started pointing fingers at the same dudes they used to call family. Now here's the crazy part. Despite all that snitching, Sex Money Murder's name still rings out heavy in the projects. Young heads still look up to OG Pete like he wrote the playbook. They talk about SMM like it was some hood myth, power moves, money, fear, all that. But what they don't see is the grime behind the glam, the betrayals, the double crosses, how the whole thing crumbled. Truth is, gang life today isn't like the movies. That ride or die loyalty, gone. The so-called code, most of them throw that out as soon as the cuffs come on. Once they're facing 30, 40 years, people start singing like it's karaoke night if it means shaving time off their sentence. Appreciate you watching. If you liked it, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.